Hello, this is Shannon Flummerfelt for Flip Schools. Welcome to the Sustaining Improvement series. This is one video in a series of 5 for central office administrators. We're just going to discuss some barriers to sustaining improvement and then introduce you to a tool called the 5S, which will help you to get to sustaining. The point of all this is that when you are looking at flipped instruction in your school district, there will be lots of chances for new practices to emerge and new ideas to be discussed. As a central office administrator, you want to be able to provide a very easy to follow protocol for your faculty and building administrators in terms of understanding what is it that works best now for us and what do we want to maintain and be able to sustain. And so that's what this video series is about. So first of all, what does it mean to sustain improvement? I don't know if how long you've been a central office administrator, but certainly over a period of time as an educator, you'll see lots of good ideas come and lots of good ideas go. And at a certain point, there tends to be a little bit of frustration in terms of, is there ever a time when we can actually have a good idea, fully develop it, and then sustain it so that it can be scaled and replicated? And the answer to that question is yes. Even though maybe we're not used to doing that in education, it's not that hard to do. And I'm going to show you a little bit about that in terms of the barriers to that, and then introduce you to a simple tool that'll help you to move forward with that. So let's say, for instance, that in your school district there's some flipping going on, the instructions being flipped, and you're starting to take a look at what does this mean? Now, in flipping, especially in mathematics and also in science, as well as the other core academic areas, there is a lot of really good content that's available, and a lot of it's open access. So now you start to take a look at these core academic areas, perhaps, and say, how can we combine what's happening here with the flip technology, with trying to understand how to really sustain improvement? So let's just, for the purpose of this video, just focus on mathematics instruction. Now, what we want to do is take a look at what barriers are, what they actually are. And so for the purposes of this particular video, what we're going to do is talk about barriers in a way that you can do something about them. If there's something outside of your auspice, it certainly may be a barrier, but we understand that there are levels of authority above us and there are external forces that are beyond our control. But let's just talk about, within the context of your school district, what are barriers and what are they in the context of your leadership practice? So what we would do is take a look at barriers, not in a way to blame anybody, not picking on people, not just getting everybody to gripe and complain, but we want to identify barriers because they actually are impediments or failures that we can do something about. There's just some kind of a lack of thinking or acting. There's some gap or dysfunction that occurs there, and it is a failure or an impediment in your system. And if you just let those go, if they're not identified, and if there's not like a root cause analysis done on them, then they can actually serve as blockers, and they can become institutional blockers. And they block the option for the chance to create value. And when we look at instruction and the scarce resources that are around, it's very, very important for us to be very careful about what we're doing that creates value and how we might be, perhaps misallocating resources. So let's say, for instance, that an example of a barrier would be that there's a failure of mathematics instruction because there's perhaps a lack of understanding of the key tenets of good curriculum. Again, as I mentioned, particularly in mathematics, there are many, many choices available in the flipped environment in order to, get content. But the idea is, how do you arrange that content into curriculum that is produces the highest levels of achievement for your students? And so if there isn't a good understanding of what is good curriculum, what does it look like in mathematics, then you're going to have a barrier there to deal with. But that barrier as an impediment or a failure in thinking, it can be identified, a root cause analysis can be created, and then, there can be an opportunity there for value creation. Let's also say that maybe there's a failure of mathematics instruction in your district because there are poor choices being made in regard to curriculum. So with all the resources that are available and all the different methodologies for teaching mathematics, maybe poor choices are being made by teachers in the classroom. They don't understand how to enact good mathematics instruction. So if that problem is identified and the root cause is analyzed, then there can be an opportunity to create value there for your students. So every one of these barriers are actually opportunities for you to drive improvement. And just to help you to understand barriers and the way that I like to think about them, I have barriers categorized into 6 different areas. And these areas either represent something related to thinking or something related to actions or doing. And as you are in a central office position, what you really want to have happen with your school district is that you think smarter, you become smarter as an organization, and that your acting becomes better, your doing becomes better, so that both thinking and acting are moving up on higher and higher levels of effectiveness. So to keep this really simple, what we try to do is think about barriers to improvement and to think about them just in terms of not all the big, complicated, content areas that are related and the specifics and so on of mathematics, but what I just want you to think about here are whether or not some of the key essential pieces here are permanently established in your district as being shared and are considered essential. And it has to do with ideas, the basic ideas of mathematics instruction, mathematics content, mathematics assessment, whatever it might be. Are there shared essential ideas? It's interesting because we can take a look at any building in any school district and talk to 5 different mathematics teachers and actually ask them, what are your key ideas about teaching math or about assessing students in math or whatever the question might be. And if you're not coming up with a common response, then you don't have shared essential ideas. And as long as there's, all of that going on in your district, it's really hard to pull together and create an improvement platform that can be sustained. Same thing is true with actions. What are some of the key actions that have to happen in a mathematics classroom in regard to any aspect of instructional delivery? What happens? Do you put kids in groups? Do you keep them working, in individualized and personalized tracks of learning? Do you make sure that they have manipulatives or not? All of these things are key pieces. And again, not all of them, but just the core essential ones, figuring out what they are and making sure those are in place. Some of the other barriers to sustaining improvement are that perhaps there's not a shared culture, there's a lack of routine or process or protocol around what mathematics instruction should be. There's been a lot of work that's been done, for instance, about the culture of mathematics instruction, how there's gender bias in instruction, and so on. And so we want to make sure that there is a shared culture, that there's an understanding, that there's some key pieces about what's done and how it's done and some of the rules and processes and so on. The other issue here is that sometimes there's not an understanding about the standards. Of course, in the last 10 years, in the last decade, standards of instruction have been kind of a core focus of the accountability movement. So they're pretty much, described to us in school districts now, especially in regard to mathematics. We understand what they are largely, but, sometimes people don't. I mean, a lot of the instructional work that goes on in school districts is figuring out what does this standard mean in terms of, student achievement, how I'm testing it, how I'm instructing it, and so on. Another couple of things that can also be barriers to sustaining improvement is that if there's a lack of understanding how to use assessments and audits and to use data to drive improvement, not to put blame in place, but to simply drive improvement, that sometimes needs to be looked at. In fact, in the case of schools now, we tend to have so much data that we're data rich but information poor. And what we want to do is get down to the point where there is information that's very useful to us. And then the last thing, which may seem kind of obvious, but actually you'd be surprised what a problem this can be, is that, what are we trying to do here with instructional delivery? What are the deliverables? And does everyone have a shared understanding of what those are? Are we all working actually on the same thing? Or do we have little specialized things that we're trying to do that are, offline with our students? So these are some of the barriers here to consider. And the reason I mention these is because that barriers are not excuses, but rather they actually create for you as an instructional leader very clear points of improvement to drive for in your district. So for instance, you may find, we don't have some essential ideas about math instruction, for instance. So that's a problem, but that barrier can be turned into a point of improvement where we would create shared essential ideas. And, then from there you begin to create those ideas and understand what they are, and sooner or later you'll be able to get to sustaining those. So of all these 6 points of improvement, which were formally on the slide before barriers, I'd like you to think about those barriers as actually helping you as an instructional leader to create clarity to be able to drive for those levels of improvement. And then the last thing I want to mention is that, as you begin to understand this, what the barriers are to improvement, it's actually not that hard to work through an improvement process and get to the point of sustaining. I don't mean that it's not hard, but I mean the protocol itself is not that hard to understand. The work of improvement is always challenging. But if we can have some clear protocols and use the tools that have been demonstrated that work fairly well, even from other sectors, these can be very helpful to us. So in the other videos, I'm going to introduce you to a tool called the 5S, which will take you through a 5-step process of sorting, setting, shining, standardizing, and sustaining. Again, what we're not going to go for is just being kind of a mill of, what's the latest thing, the greatest thing, what's everybody talking about, try it for a little while and then throw it out the window. We want to take the best ideas, be able to incorporate those into our school districts and to maintain them and, to be able to scale and replicate success. So I hope you've enjoyed this video, and if you want any more information about flipping, you can go to the Flip Institute website at theflipinstitute.com. Hey, thanks for listening.